Well, welcome everybody. This is James Gailliard. Welcome to the James Gailliard Show. We are on Choice 92.1 FM, the People's Station. We come to you every Monday from 5 to 6. We're talking politics, culture, news, anything that's going to make people's lives better. Because as you know, the premise of our show is that we're not going to be able to entertain ourselves to a better life. We're going to have to educate ourselves to a better life. And I promise to bring you movers and shakers and thought leaders and people that you just need to know and hear from. And true to my word and promise, I'm doing that today. We have a very special person, a Supreme Court, the North Carolina Supreme Court Justice, Allison Riggs. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Reverend, for having me.
It's delightful to have you. I want to just jump right in with the courts. And let's talk to our listeners about how important and why the state Supreme Court is so important. Even that, Justice, what does the state Supreme Court do? And then why does it matter to the average voter?
Yeah, absolutely. So the state Supreme Court is the highest court in our state. The U.S. Supreme Court's the highest in the nation. But we are called upon to decide, what does the North Carolina Constitution guarantee every person in this state? We're called upon to mediate disputes with finality and to interpret state law. There are so many issues that come through our courts that folks don't realize are there. So, if you get hurt on the workplace, you go to the Industrial Commission and the appeal comes straight to the North Carolina Supreme Court. So, if you care about people getting back up on their feet after a setback, you should care about our courts. We make decisions relating to environmental justice, voting rights, public education, criminal justice, both criminal matters and reform issues. Chief Justice Sherry Beasley, who served nobly, made some really important reforms to our state courts after the murder of George Floyd to address racial bias in the criminal justice system. So there is no part of your day-to-day life that isn't affected by your courts. You have local courts that aren't statewide, but the appeals courts are where if you have a problem that doesn't get resolved locally, it goes there and we can provide justice. Or where we see our courts now is more interested in rolling back rights. And what I need people to understand in this very busy time is to remember that we have three branches of government. The executive gets the most attention, the president and the governor, and those are important roles. But the legislative branch and the judicial branch are critical, too, for us having checks and balances. The folks who wrote our state and federal constitutions thought government would work best and power would have the least corrupting influence if we divided power amongst different branches. And so when our judiciary, our courts are independent and willing to say without fear or favor, this is the law, the Constitution means more than just the paper it's written on. We do actually have a right to vote. We do actually have a right to a sound basic public education. That's when we all flourish as North Carolinians, and that's when we live up to our governmental aspirations.
Right. That's so good. And so how long have you been serving on court?
So it's been nearly 2 years. I was appointed, Governor Cooper appointed me first to the Court of Appeals in December of 22. Okay. And so then to the Supreme Court in September of 23. So I've been on the Supreme Court a year and 2 weeks.
Okay, so a year and 2 weeks. In the last, I'm going to say 2 or 3 years, what have been some of the rulings that have come out of our state Supreme Court that's been most disappointing for you?
So a couple were in cases that I worked on when I was an attorney. So I was a civil rights attorney for nearly 15 years at the Southern Coalition for Social Justice. I did a variety of different kinds of law, environmental justice law, but I spent the most time working on voting rights. I took 2 cases to the North Carolina Supreme Court. One was a voter ID case. So I represented a young man named Jabari Holmes, who was born with severe cerebral palsy, was nonverbal, but had an eye gaze computer and is an incredible young man and never drove, never had a driver's license. And we proved in a trial court that our voter ID law was designed with discriminatory intent to keep Black voters from participating fully in the political process. And we won that case, but then we lost control of the North Carolina Supreme Court. And when I say we, so the Republicans made these races partisan. But when I'm out there campaigning for folks like Judge Carolyn Thompson, Ed Eldred, and Martin Moore, it's because those are the justice-minded people that we need on the bench. We need people who put character and country over party and recognize that it's the people, not the powerful, that we need to be most focused on. So I'm running with those folks and to help Justice Anita Earls keep her seat in 2026. But I knew that when Republicans took control of the North Carolina Supreme Court in 2022, they were going to roll back that case. We had also just won an important case that said extreme partisan gerrymandering was unconstitutional. And your listeners know in North Carolina, race and politics are intertwined. That's the Southern strategy. It was made to be that way. And so when we fought partisan gerrymandering, it was also about fighting racial discrimination. And the North Carolina Supreme Court, when it was there was a majority of justice-minded people, they said, no discriminatory voter ID, no gerrymandering so that people's vote doesn't count, that you can't vote your representatives out. And both of those cases in 2023, before I was on the court, the Supreme Court rolled those back. They took those rulings off the table. And so now that's why voters will be asked to show a picture ID when they vote. It is why our congressional districts, right now we have 7 Democrats and 7 Republicans representing us in Washington, D.C., and we're pretty much a 50-50 state. Right. After this election, we anticipate it'll be either 11-3 or 10-4. Congressman Don Davis is in a really, really tough fight, and so it'll depend on that. But that's what gerrymandering does.
You know, I am all too acquainted with it. I ran for the state house, and I tell people, you know, this is more than even every 10 years during the census. I ran 4 consecutive times for House District 25, and I never ran in the same drawn seat twice because every 2 years it was a different district.
Yep.
And so when people think that thing is not real, it is very real. And then when you start looking at the East, I mean, we lost almost all of our black representation out of the state. You know, I do think with a really strong turnout, we can turn some of that. But it's you know, it's pivotal that we get this vote out. I'm wondering from, in your position now as a justice, if we could run our state elections, our state judicial elections in the most fair way, what would it look like? So,
you know, I'll caveat that I'm not a policymaker. What I can tell you from having campaigned for nearly 2 years is that there are 2 things that are really injecting a lot of partisan tone and rhetoric into judicial elections. The Republican legislature decided to change the rules for how you run for judicial office. It used to be nonpartisan because party politics shouldn't have a place in the courtroom, but now you have to run as a Republican or a Democrat. And that was this Republican legislature decided it. And then the other thing that happened is you used to have public financing of judicial elections. So you could have public financing of any election, but for judicial elections, it's really important. And that's just like when a little bit of your tax dollars, small amount, goes into a fund that lets judges get their message out, all of them, regardless of who they are, and so voters know about their judges. But I spend time every day calling people, including lawyers, asking them for money, not people who have a case in front of me, but if they're a lawyer, they could. And that's very toxic to our belief that our courts and our judges are fair and impartial. If they're asking for money and people are giving them money, that's, you know, I would like, in an ideal world, we'd go back to that because I don't think this is good for North Carolina or good for our courts. But bottom line is I know if justice-minded people don't win these elections, that North Carolinians will hurt. And so I am determined to make sure that justice-minded people, myself, Justice Earls in 2026, on our Court of Appeals, Judge Carolyn Thompson, Martin Moore, and Ed Eldred are elected because these are the people that I trust to keep us all safe, healthy, healthy and able to flourish in this state that we love.
I couldn't agree with you more. I'm wondering, in terms of where your races show up in the ballot, you're right after, I guess, we got top of ticket, because to your point, so many people talk about top of ticket, right? So we've got our top of ticket race, president, governor, we've got our congressional races, and then after our congressional races,
it's after the Council of State.
Council of State, and then our judicial.
Statewide judicial. Now, your local judicial will be lower.
Gotcha.
But so we'll be towards the bottom of your front page,
okay.
middle to bottom of your front page. And, we have a lot of independently elected Council of State members, and you're doing incredibly important work lifting up what does the state treasurer do, what does the Secretary of State do, because sometimes when people don't know those middle ones, they're done. They turn their ballot in, and they have left some of their power on the table.
Yeah.
So, we know if people persist through Council of State and then see the judges, that's great. And if they make it, to us, they'll likely keep voting.
Right.
But it's hard work. It's going to be a long ballot this year, and obviously, folks need to. We want to educate them about what we stand for, and it's important to me that people not only know who I am as a person, what my values are, but those of my opponent as well. And my opponent is someone who just tore Chief Justice Sherry Beasley apart for the reforms she did after the murder of George Floyd. He said there is no racial bias in the criminal justice system. I spent 15 years doing social justice and racial justice work, and my clients, that's not their reality.
That's right.
And so I talk to folks about that I value reproductive freedom and the ability of women to take care of themselves and get access to health care. We have incredible maternal health outcome challenges, and it's very disparate impact for Black women.
Right.
Vice President Harris was in Georgia yesterday talking about a young Black woman with a 6-year-old son who was having a miscarriage and went to get emergency health care, and they let her bleed out because of some of the anti-choice laws in the state, because doctors are afraid that lawmakers will send them to prison if they provide women the health care. And we know that there are racial disparities in our health care system. This is not about abortion. This is about my ability to start my family using IVF. I'm 43 years old, and I've only been married 3 years. My husband and I hope to start and grow our family.
Yeah.
It's about the ability of women who are losing much-wanted pregnancies to get that emergency health care they need. This is the most important election for being able to protect each other's health. And so I talk about that I value reproductive freedom, that I value democracy. I understand how fragile it is, and that it doesn't work when it's not multiracial, inclusive, and participatory.
Yeah.
And these are the things I think we should be expecting. It's nonpartisan. I'm not saying how I'm going to rule in a case, but you should know what I believe in, what I stand for, because judges are being, there's a lot of power in putting on that robe and sitting on that bench. I should, and every person should earn the trust of voters to hold that power.
I could not agree with you more. For those of you who are just tuning in, this is James Gailliard. You're listening or watching maybe the James Gailliard Show on Choice 92.1 FM or on YouTube or on Facebook or on my podcast, In Black and White. I have in studio today North Carolina Supreme Court Justice Allison Riggs, and she is educating us about the judicial system here in North Carolina. But before I let you go, Justice, I want you humanized. I always want those who are with me, I want people to see the human side. It's been easy with you because the whole interview you've been kind of sharing who you are, your value system, what matters to you. What would the Allison Riggs today say to your 20-year-old, 18-year-old Allison Riggs in terms of mistakes you've made or what you've witnessed or what you've seen? What advice would you share?
I get to go into colleges and law schools and talk to what I view as that younger version of me. And like many young women in professional spaces and male-dominated spaces, I wasn't sure that my voice was worthy or important until fairly recent in my career, and I gave a commencement speech at my law school's graduation this year, and I told folks, your voice matters now, not after you get a few more bullet points on your resume. You have a lived experience. My lived experience was I grew up in West Virginia in labor communities where I saw how the power of collective action, that when we look out for each other and try and keep each other safe and lift each other up, that is incredibly powerful. I am where I am today because of Justice Anita Earle's mentorship. So I know now that my moral obligation is not just to do justice and serve my fellow North Carolinians. It's also to turn around and hold my hand out to the person coming up next, too. That's how we get great leadership that cares more about people than power and live up to what we want to be as North Carolinians.
That's so good. That's so good. So final word, what's the final thing you want to say to North Carolina voters in this election cycle?
This is an opportunity to build power like we haven't seen since 2008. The difference between 2024 and 2008, though, is we know what it's like to make gains and lose traction afterwards, to backslide. Right. We are going into this election with the opportunity to elect the first Black and AAPI woman to lead our country, and that's incredible, and we're going to do that in North Carolina, but we're also looking at building long-term power, so we're not doing it for one election cycle. We can't have people lose and gain their rights in the political wins. Right. So this is a chance, if we grab it, if we do this work now, and if we commit to keep doing the work, maybe not to the point of exhaustion, but if we keep doing the work, North Carolina is at a tipping point, and we have the opportunity. But I need your listeners to go and make their voices heard, to hear what I'm saying, that your voice matters now, and it makes a difference. Sherry Beasley lost her race to keep her seat on the Supreme Court by 401 votes out of 5.4 million votes cast. Your listeners far outclips that margin. So your voice and your vote matters incredibly this year, and we're not going to let you down. We're going to build power for the long term.
Yeah, and we have seen it locally with the race of our district attorney, Robert Evans. He lost by so few votes. It turned out, Justice, to the calculation, because it's Nash, Edgecombe, and Wilson, the calculation was 1 vote per precinct. Yep. Literally a vote per precinct. So, family, y'all have heard it, right? We have the Supreme Court justice here. Your vote matters. We want to encourage you to vote early. The first opportunity you get to vote. This is what I want everybody to do. Go to NC Voter Lookup. Just Google it. Type in your name. Type in the county you live in, your date of birth. Hit search. Look at your voter registration. Make sure it's active. Now, I want you to reach into your pocket. Pull out your identification. Make sure the address on your identification matches what's on that statewide website. And then I want you to determine today what your voter plan is. I know you have all through early voting. I want to hear that. What day are you voting? What time are you voting? It should already be on your calendar. You should have already scheduled it. So schedule it, and then after you vote, harass everyone you know and care about to make sure they vote. In studio with me today is our Supreme Court Justice Allison Riggs. She is running to remain on the court. I want to ask you to support her and everyone she's identified on this show today. We're going to take a quick commercial break, pay some bills. Justice, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Reverend.